Mr. Chair, 87 representatives have voted aye, 13 have voted no.
House Bill number 475 has passed second reading. Members of the committee, you have before you for your consideration House Bill number 481. The clerk will read the title of the bill.
Mr. Chair, House Bill number 481, introduced by Bob Brown, a bill for enacting titled, an act revising wildfire initial attack authority, allowing county governing bodies to authorize wildfire initial attack on all lands within the county regardless of ownership, requiring the governing body to provide notification, providing for compensation to the county for costs incurred in initial attack activities, and many sections, Mr. Chair.
What is your pleasure, Representative Brown?
Mr. Chair, I move that when this committee does rise and report after having under consideration House Bill 481, that it recommend the same do pass.
Representative Brown.
Members of the House, what this bill really does is it's a local option. It's a choice for the county commissioners to start initial attack on wildfire when they see that that may be in the best interest of their citizens. And I know there's some opposition to this bill, but like I say, what it really is, it's an opportunity for the county, if they are not receiving the response that they need from the state or federal government. And I will say that I believe the state is doing a great job at this. In our area, they've been responding very quickly, but I would say that the federal government might be a little bit different story. We hear so often that they take control, and then it's 4 days before 3 or 4 days before they have any equipment there to put these fires out. I believe this is an option that could possibly save millions of dollars in the local economies, and as well as provide for some health and safety for our citizens.
Is there discussion? Representative Curdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I can understand the frustration that the good Representative Thompson Falls has from time to time on some issues that have occurred in that area. This past summer was probably one of the examples that he would like to cite. I just want to remind everyone that we need to be really careful when we start moving in this direction. And I think most of you know my background, and I'm speaking from a long history of watching these types of things unfold. Last summer, the fire that the good representative cites was in a very, very difficult situation. We tried to jump a fire on this location in 1979, and we waved off. That tells you how rugged and nasty this part of the country is. Now, it was very difficult for folks to fight this fire here, and it got away and frankly ended up to be a pretty costly fire. But on the other hand, there is a lot of potential damage and problems for local fire districts if somebody should be injured fighting a fire without proper training. I've been on the periphery of a number of fire investigations, and I've seen local governments really take a financial hit for not having qualified, adequately trained firefighters. And as a result, the county and or the local fire chief has had a serious liability issue. Now, all of our state fire chiefs have come out in opposition to this bill. So I think we need to be really careful when we take a look at this bill. It does have some major pitfalls in terms of liability for both the counties and for fire chiefs on these local volunteer fire departments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Fitzgerald.
Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that may be unique to the mountainous areas, but fundamentally the volunteer fire companies are expected and required to respond to protect their community within their fire areas. Fire chiefs and county commissioners are very aware of the dangers that encompass these issues and the responses. Any good fire chief will draw a line in the sand and know where his limitations are. And in that case, that fire may or may not be able to be put out. But to not respond is not an option. We have a community obligation to protect our land and resources and our community within that area. So I support this bill. It's something that's standard operating procedure east of the mountains. I'm not sure why it isn't west of the mountains, but counties have that obligation and the limitations, and I would agree with the previous speaker that are training, but they're in a constant mode of training. So I encourage a green light. Thank you.
Representative Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I just wanted to flag for you that there was a pretty substantial legal note on this bill, and I'll just read one sentence that I think summarizes it. By statutorily authorizing a county governing body to engage in wildfire initial attacks on lands under federal ownership without obtaining the requisite permission from the federal government, the bill may raise potential constitutional conformity issues with respect to the property clause and the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution. And then our legal folks go on for about a page and a half, supporting that concern. Just wanted to make you all aware of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm very proud to announce that both members of the Volunteer Firefighter Caucus have agreed this is a good bill. Vote green.
Representative Harris.
Yes, I'd like to comment on in favor of this bill because I come from a very rural area, and I'll give you an example of the two counties that I live in, basically. It's Petroleum and Garfield County. In Petroleum County, I believe one lightning storm, there was 11 fires. And by the time the airplane was searching the area, the Petroleum County Fire Department had probably 9 of them out already. They respond instantly, and it's a long distance for anybody else to come and try to do the same thing. The BLM firefighters, the state firefighters, they work well with them and really appreciate them. Garfield County, we had a fire about 2 miles above west of my house, and it was late in the afternoon. The firefighters showed up. There was no road in there. They showed up in my yard, left their trucks, and took their backpacks and walked in there. And they thought they could get there by dark, and they said it was just at dark, and they got that put out, and that would have turned into a huge fire hadn't they done that. So they walked 4 miles in there, killed that fire, and we're back in Jordan in probably 6 hours, I suppose 7 hours. But these guys do a great job, and they're well trained, and they're very capable, and they're right on the fire, a lot faster than anyone. So this is an important bill. Thank you.
Representative Kipp.
Mr. Chair and body, I'd like to address the bill. I had the opportunity to kind of study this issue a little bit because primarily wildland firefighting was a major economic benefit to every reservation throughout the first half of the last century. Since 2005, fire suppression employment on reservations has practically dried up to zero. We do have one initial attack team on the reservation. Some of the initial attack teams are sponsored by agencies. But under Line 15, where a lot of the lands in Montana are under federal control, there's some consideration has to be given. I agree with the representative saying that there have to be very well trained individuals in the fire suppression. They have the red card system. They have to have certain standards that you have to meet within that structure. But under the federal contract crews, there's 41 crews in the United States. These are federal contracts crews, type 2 AI crews, and they're formed to fight wildland fires. These crews are stationed in Northern California, Oregon, a couple in Idaho, a couple in Washington. Montana has 2 in the Missoula area, Graybill and another company. East of the Rocky Mountains, there's only 2 federal contract crews, and they're in North Carolina. So response time is very critical in any wildland fires. On my reservation, over the last 7 years, we've almost lost our total reservation forest lands to wildfires. We had trained individuals were not allowed to go up there and fight the fires. We had to evacuate the Heartbeat community 2 years ago because of wildland fires. We find out that in wildland suppression is that response time is important. I believe that I support this bill because it's starting to look at identifying and resolving this issue for response time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Essman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the body, I want to respond to the legal note from the people on the first floor, and I disagree with it. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. I don't believe that all the property the federal government owns, they own as a sovereign. I believe that the lands that they reserve for military purposes and for our reservations within the state of Montana, those are lands they've reserved as a sovereign in order to carry out their federal role. The other lands they own, they are a landowner, not as a sovereign. They are a landowner subject to the laws of the state of Montana, including the ability which this bill would give with respect to allowing local governments to protect the communities. So I disagree with that legal note. There is one big difference between the federal government and me when it comes to their operation of the property they own and my operation of the property that I own. A, I can't print money, and B, I can't provide a big check to reimburse for firefighting costs. So they do have the power of the purse with respect to impacting their property, but I do not believe they have the power as a sovereign to prevent local communities from protecting themselves by initiating these fire calls. So I encourage a yes vote.
Representative Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak in opposition to this bill, but be very brief. First of all, I understand the great intent of the sponsor, and I don't like to oppose Bob. He does a great job. I'm a representative from Sanders, and I understand the need they have over there, but there's a couple of problems that I have. First of all, as I read the bill, the whereases seem good, but there's some shalls in there. One of them is that the local government shall organize a local rural unit, and from my perspective, I see some added stress on local government. I mean, there's some other shalls in there too, and we're already struggling for volunteers and resources where I'm from. Finally, I realize I've had this conversation with one of my sons, who's a firefighter for the Forest Service and a smoke jumper, and the confusion that can result from having two different jurisdictions on site is something that we have to think about. So I would like to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Representative Hamlet.
Mr. Chairman, members of the body, I support this because, we have sage grouse country all over eastern Montana, and it's very, very important that initial attack happens by whoever's around, because that can destroy hundreds of thousands of acres of habitat in a few hours. Thank you.
Representative Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the body, I was one of the no's in committee. I called up the fire chief in our county and visited with him, and after visiting with him, absolutely I am changing to a yes. Initial response is absolutely critical and stops a lot of the big fires from ever getting going. So I'm encouraging a yes vote.
Representative McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for the sponsor, please.
Does the sponsor yield?
Sure.
You owe me after that joke. Mr. Chair, Representative Brown, is there anything that prevents a local government or a county from engaging in an agreement with the federal government now?
I think the only thing that prohibits them from, I mean, I believe they do enter into some agreements with them. And I guess how I would respond to that would be the only thing that keeps them, and the intent of this bill is we do have the government does show up and say we are in control of this fire, and then they put no resources on it. That's exactly what the problem I'm looking to solve here. If they choose to come in and not put any resources on the fire, I believe the county and the local authority have the right, and not only just the right, but the duty to protect their citizens, in regards to the supremacy clause and everything else. I read the entire Constitution to see where it is we gave up our right to protect ourselves, and I don't see that. But yes, I believe they do have the right to engage in some agreements.
Follow up?
Does the sponsor continue to yield?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Brown, is there anything that would prevent the local entity from saying, hey, if Uncle Sam isn't going to fight the fire, then we get to go in as a local entity?
It is my intent as the local entity, being the first responder in this case, when that other entity shows up with adequate resources to fight the fire, that they would relinquish authority to them immediately.
Thank you.
Representative White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Came out of Natural Resources. I just mentioned a couple of things that we heard in committee. Fire marshal or the fire chief down on the Roaring Lion fire that was brought up in front of the committee. They were the initial responders to the fire. They called out all the other agencies. They arrived on the fire at the same time as the Forest Service. So that's a case where the Forest Service was in the area, close to be able to get there, got there at the same time as the initial attack from the local fire department. So that worked very well. But as Representative Harris said, in some of the rural communities, that doesn't always happen, and the resources from the federal agencies or the state agencies aren't there. I think the most important part of the bill here starts on line 24, page 2, and goes through the rest of the page down to line 30. And this is an option for local governments. They may, which I think is very important. It doesn't say they must. It doesn't say anything about that. It just says that they may authorize fire protection entities. And on line 26 through first of line 27, when fire danger is immediate and poses an imminent threat to health, safety, or property, I think it's the responsibility of the local governments to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of their county. So I think this is very important. They may do this if they choose to. They may enter into an agreement. They may put resources or allow their local fire departments to put resources on the fire, on initial attack, to get that fire out. And I think they're responsible for protection of human life and property. So I think this is a very important bill, and I recommend it do pass.
There being no further discussion, does the sponsor wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for the great discussion. And I'll give you a great example. This year, this last summer, just above my house, the resources get so spread out. Just above my house, I look up on the hillside one morning, having my morning cup of coffee, and I think I can see a little bit of smoke. I'm not sure if it's smoke coming out or if it's just a cloud, so I call the next nearest, furthest away from me, next nearest neighbor to that, and he looks up on the hill and he says, yeah, it's for sure smoke. He is a well-trained, well-respected wildland firefighter. He has been for years, and many would consider him a complete authority. But so he says, yes, there is a fire up there. And So he called it into the to DNRC, and they said, well, we'll try to get somebody out there today. This is what I'm talking about. You know, a lot of times their resources can be spread out. There's things that can happen. It was one little spot up there making a little bit of smoke. So if just a couple of people could have gone in there and done a lot of good work with it. It apparently they did get some folks in there, but this is what I'm talking about. These issues that we have, I believe it's the county's responsibility to get some help to take care of some of these things and save some of our property and our assets, our resources. Nothing's worse than a fire that gets out of control. So let's put them out as soon as we can and vote green.
The question now arises on the motion of Representative Brown that when this committee does rise and report, after having had under consideration House Bill number 481, recommend that the same do pass. Those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Are there absentee votes?
None, Mr. Chair.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Mr. Chair, 61 representatives have voted aye, 39 have voted no.
House Bill number 481 has passed second reading. Members of the committee, you have before you for your consideration House Bill number 487. The clerk will read the title of the bill.
Mr. Chair, House Bill number 487, introduced by Funk, a bill for enacting titled and act revising laws related to protecting youth athletes from permanent injury and death related to concussion, expanding existing requirements to include non-public schools and youth athletic organizations, providing definitions, clarifying the athletic trainers and licensed healthcare professionals, providing immunity from certain